Good morning, Suzuki Science, grade 11s, and we are now in week number 10. So we just finished off the digestive system. This week we're looking at the respiratory system, and next week we're looking at the circulatory system. And that will end our systemic learning for the grade 11 biology course. And I know that many of you, as you approach June, well, I guess we're not approaching June. Since we're in June, many of you, it's becoming more of a challenge in some cases to remain focused, but I'm hoping that you are so interested in this material that you will continue to learn about these systems. So this week, just to give you a quick overview, I have the lesson sequence, the worksheet that I always have, the Google worksheet that you can work through. Please, when you start this one, you start with a 4 corners activity by clicking on this link. It'll bring you to the Nearpod. You can use the app like we've done in class, or you can go to the website. Either way, if you click on the link, it should bring you directly there, but if you need a code, you'll see it on the document here. So please complete that first before you listen to the rest of the video lesson, before you move forward with the PowerPoint or any of the activities. Once you've done that, then you're going to work your way through the PowerPoint, through the worksheet as always. You'll see I have certain questions on here that I've highlighted in green, yellow, and purple. It's the same leveling of completion that I've been doing for the past 3 months now. And the first activity is talking about vaping, so we can't talk about the respiratory system without talking about vaping. Now, I know we were talking about coronavirus and COVID-19, and this seems to be dominating all the news, but there's another area that has been pushed to the side, and that other area happens to be pretty much everything else. We haven't talked about anything else. Many other diseases that have often taken lives, but not necessarily, have taken more lives than normal during the COVID epidemic. In many cases because the same people have not received the same attention that they should have been receiving. And so by this token, prior to the epidemic that we're currently in, the conversation around vaping and its damage or not damage to the respiratory system and the body was hotly debated. By the non-vapors and non-smokers, it wasn't debated. It was pretty clear to them, but the people who do vape, for whatever reason, they tend to not necessarily listen to the science and just do it for whatever reason. So I'd like you to read the questions I have, and you're going to either agree, strongly disagree, or remain neutral based on the question. And then I'll have a conversation with the class about what your perspective looks like. Your end of the week product. So I always have an end of the week product. Last week we had the menu items. I'm still going to do a recap of last week, so that's going to be a separate PowerPoint. And this week is going to be actually related to the question of the week, to be honest. So the question of the week this week is going to be related to your end of the week product. And I'm asking you to, because everything to do with COVID is, because COVID is a respiratory disorder, disease, that means realistically anything that we talk about that touches upon the coronavirus or COVID-19 is in some sense related to this unit. So I'm asking you to share any anecdotes you might have or anything interesting that you found online, because I know a lot of you are, falling down the rabbit hole of various things that talk about conspiracy theories on one side, but also coronavirus and COVID-19 and what does it mean for you and your summer or next year or your birthday or anything, your travel plans, all those sorts of things. So that's the end of the week product. I've given you a link, an early link to the question of the week document, so you can go ahead and click on that. I've added something else for other people as well in interpreting a graphic, but that's the main gist. For this week, the Learn 360 resources are the best resources for you to learn this concept. They've done a really good job with this particular resource. So I encourage you to log in as you would. Go to the BYOD page, log in, go to Learn 360. Once you've done all that, then click the link or copy and paste the link, and you'll be able to access the physiology of the human respiratory system. That's green. Everybody should do that. And the transport of respiratory gases, which connects this learning to next week. Because next week we're doing circulatory system, and you can't really talk about digestion or respiration without talking about circulation. It's really hard to do. the major demonstration of learning. So this is like last week where I asked you to show me how food gets from the outside to a certain location inside your body. This one is now oxygen and carbon dioxide. So it's the same idea. You're tracing oxygen and carbon dioxide and you're showing how it flows through your body. So that's the major learning. Then as you go to the PowerPoint, you'll notice the PowerPoint has many pieces related to the concept. So here's the PowerPoint. You'll see there's purple, which is the elaboration, the really, really nice to know. The green is what you should know at the minimum, and the yellow is a complete learning. There's a lot of green here because really this slide here, I've taken one slide and I divided it into 12 slides, and I've gone step by step by step instructions to explain to you the process. And yeah, so work your way through there. And on the very last slide here, for those of you who want to talk about coronavirus, a little bit more about that, I have not included that in any detail in this lesson, mostly because we are reducing the amount of learning that we're doing in the distance learning model. So for me to talk about coronavirus, I would need some more time. If you're interested in knowing more about the mechanics of the coronavirus, what treatments are available currently, what research is being done, then I'm happy to run that as a Google Meet. Just let me know the time and the place. And when is convenient for you, I'll let you know if it's convenient for me. We'll meet, we'll talk, 1-on-2, 1-on-5, whatever we want, okay? So that's referenced on the last slide of this PowerPoint. So that gives an overview of the week. As you continue going through this worksheet, you'll notice that most of the things in here reference the PowerPoint. In some cases, I've given you web links. So they're simulations, movies, just web pages that you will peruse and use to answer some of these questions. These questions are also mostly answered in the PowerPoint as well. If at any point you get stuck and you're really confused about what to answer, then just ask and I'll undoubtedly help you. At the end of this worksheet, you'll see a lot of purple. So this really short case gives you a situation of a person who's doing some kind of exercise, and I'd like you to explain to me what's happening with the respiratory system. This one here is a larger case study that connects to SARS and MERS, the two previous coronaviruses that killed lots of people in previous pandemics or epidemics. There's these case study questions. You might recognize this because I gave this case study at the very beginning of the pandemic when I was giving you various case studies you can complete. No one completed this one, so I've brought it up again, and it's purple, so you don't have to do it. It gives you a more thorough understanding of what's happening with coronaviruses, including COVID-19, MERS, and SARS. And then at the very end, I have this extension lab. So it's a lab you can do at home that measures your vital capacity, your lung capacity, how much air you can actually hold inside your lungs. The requirements for you is that you need a balloon and a ruler. If you have that, then you can complete this activity, and it'll be really interesting. People who are very fit, who run marathons, triathlons, who do extreme exercise, they tend to have very large lung capacities. And typically a person who's not fit, who might be a smoker or is very ill, they'll have a much reduced lung capacity. And we have a device at school which I normally have all of you test, and it measures your vital capacity. And it is, on average, most of the students in the class would probably blow a 2.5. Some other students I've had in the past have been able to blow a 4 or 5. An extreme athlete could probably blow a 7 or an 8 on this spirometer, it's called. So that gives you an idea of the activity. I'm going to end this part here, and then the next part I'm going to diagram the flow of oxygen through the respiratory system and back out again, and it's supposed to complement the PowerPoint. All right, so what I like to do is I like to show you how oxygen will come in. I'll use blue for oxygen. No, I'll use this color for oxygen. How oxygen is going to come into your body and how you respire, okay? With respiration, there's a lot of terms. I guess one of the things I did want to show you before I started, though, I'm not doing a full lesson, right? You're going to use the PowerPoint to learn the concept. But one of the slides I always show at the beginning of this is this, and I ask you, what do you see? What do you think this is? And then there's a lot of people guessing here and they're guessing there. I'm not going to tell you what it is. You are going to write it down in the worksheet what you think these people are wearing. So with the respiration, there's a lot of confusion in biology because of the terminology we use. breathing, ventilation, external respiration, internal respiration, cellular respiration, and everything in between. So it's understandable that you could get confused if you're not great with the terminology. So I'm going to draw, but I'm not going to draw a person because, like I said, I'm terrible. But you're going to have this, I'll draw a box here, and this box, this is going to represent the oral cavity, and this will represent the nasal cavity. All right. So when you breathe, you're supposed to breathe in your, so this is nose, mouth. At the back here, so this is the roof of your mouth here, and this is the bottom of your mouth, and this is your nasal cavity. So your nasal cavity and your mouth, they meet together in this area here known as the pharynx. So this is a common area between the digestive system and the respiratory system. That means you can breathe air in your nose or your mouth, and it will still make it to this region. But there's an advantage if you breathe through your nose. In your nose, you have these hairs. And these hairs, what they do is they'll block out dust particles, right? Relatively large things that might enter your respiratory system. Also, your nasal cavity is lined with all these blood vessels. So I guess I'll use this here for blood. There's blood vessels all in here. And so as the air, the cold air, comes in and it goes past your nasal passage, this nasal passage will warm the air up. And because there's so many blood vessels really close to the surface, they'll actually put water into the air and moisten the air. So as the air reaches the back of the throat, it's moist and warm. If you breathe through your mouth, you don't get that advantage. It might warm up slightly, but the design of the mouth doesn't warm the air and it doesn't humidify the air. And this is important because when the air comes to the respiratory surface, the respiratory surface needs to be wet. It needs to be moist. If it's dry, then respiration is not as efficient. Think about when you're running in the cold and your mouth is open and how your throat gets parched and how difficult it is to breathe sometimes. Okay? So as we get to the back of the throat here, at the back of the throat, let me just do this thing here. We have two tubes. Okay? Now, one of these tubes is your air tube, and the other tube here, let's erase this up here, is your food tube. So your air tube is first, and your food tube is second. And your food tube is actually flat. It only opens up through peristalsis when you're swallowing. So when you swallow, your food tube will open up. But in front, right here, we have our air tube. And so the air, when you breathe it in, should go through this air tube. When you swallow, however, the food, when it comes in, when you eat your food can actually fall down your air tube. If the food falls in the air tube, you'll end up choking, asphyxiation, when you block the air getting to the lungs, the respiratory surface. So we have the special little flap, the epiglottis, which you learned about hopefully last week in the digestive system. The epiglottis closes and it prevents the food from going into the air tube, and instead it goes to the food tube and down to the stomach. But we're focusing on the respiratory system. So in the respiratory system, the air will go down the air tube, and the air tube is called the trachea. I'm going to give you a video where you get to watch a person talk about the larynx, right? The larynx is the voice box organ that sits here. And the voice box organ here is responsible for you to make sounds to communicate. You can sing, you can talk, and all sorts of things. I'm not going to go in detail here. In the PowerPoint, you'll see some pictures of it, but I encourage you to look at the video. It's very interesting. So the air goes through that, and the trachea must remain open. If it closes, you can't breathe, right? So someone punched you in the trachea and collapsed it, you cannot get air in. So it always has to be open. So the trachea is the first branch, the first route that the air flows down. Then next, the trachea will break into two big branches. Okay? And these branches are called the bronchi. Right? You got the left bronchi and the right bronchi. And they're also ringed with these cartilage rings, that the same thing you'll find in the your ears and your nose, and they keep the tubes open. So you got a big giant tube here, it gets a little smaller into these bronchi, and these bronchi, they keep on, there's a fractal pattern here. So for those of you who are really, enjoy math and some of the concepts we talked about in math, you might have talked about fractal geometry. So we see a fractal geometric pattern here where the bronchial tubes keep on getting smaller and smaller and smaller, right? That's what we see here. So the bronchi, these two big tubes here, and then these bronchial tubes are just like the bronchi, except they're smaller. And they're also ribbed with cartilage rings to make sure that it stays open, bronchial tubes. And at the very end of these bronchial tubes, you'll eventually see, and I have to kind of blow it up here, I'm not going to draw it to scale, but you'll eventually see these air sacs. And these air sacs is where one of the respiratory events occur. So the air is coming in, it goes down the trachea, through the bronchi, into the bronchial tubes, into the alveoli. And it's in the alveoli where the first respiration event occurs. So this is where it's impossible to talk about these without talking about circulatory system. But there'll be a blood vessel that comes up from the heart, and this blood vessel will be carrying deoxygenated blood. So the blood is very low in oxygen, and it tends to be high in carbon dioxide. And so carbon dioxide will leave the blood and it will go into the alveoli. It will diffuse from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration, and then you'll breathe out the carbon dioxide. Expiration. The oxygen, which is in high concentration, it's going to diffuse from a region of high concentration in the alveoli into the blood vessel. And so the blood vessel is going to pick up the oxygen and it's going to bring it down to the heart. Okay? And so this next part I should be talking about during the circulatory system, but once again, it's very hard to separate the two. Okay. So the blood is going to come back from the lungs that has oxygen in it, and it's going to enter the heart. And I'm not going to talk about the parts of the heart. That's not important for us today. And this oxygenated blood that's sitting in here is going to come to one region of the heart, and then it's going to move from the atrium up here down to the ventricle. And then from this ventricle, the blood is going to carry the oxygen from the heart to your body. And that could be any part of your body, your brain, your arm muscles, your leg muscles, your stomach, your heart itself, whatever you want to call it. So this here represents your anything, right? So we'll call this your organs, cells, tissue. This is your heart, in case you don't recognize my heart. And so now this blood vessel has all this oxygen, and when it gets to the cells, it will deliver the oxygen to the cells. And so now the cells get their oxygen. And the cells are undergoing metabolism, and they're producing carbon dioxide as a byproduct, and so the carbon dioxide will now be delivered back to the blood vessel. And this blood vessel, this vein, will return to the heart. So this is grade 10. We talked about this in grade 10. And now I have this deoxygenated blood that's in the heart, goes to the atrium, goes to the ventricle, leaves the heart through this pulmonary artery, and it goes back up to the alveoli where it picks up where it dumps off the carbon dioxide, picks up oxygen, and the whole process begins again. Okay, so this is respiration, right? It involves several different types of systems, but we're focusing on respiratory system. So in terms of keywords, there's something called external respiration. External respiration occurs inside the body. So external respiration occurs right here when you get an exchange in the alveoli, oxygen, to the blood vessel, these pulmonary blood vessels here. That's known as external respiration, which is kind of weird because it happens inside the body. So that's where external respiration occurs. And then internal respiration occurs here. Internal respiration is when the blood delivers the oxygen to the organs, to the cells themselves. This is internal respiration, and this makes more sense because it's happening inside your body. Okay? And the last one is cellular respiration. And so if I were to take this region in here, right, and I were to magnify it, you would see a cell. And this cell would have an organelle known as a mitochondria. And as oxygen enters the mitochondria to do whatever it needs to do, right, and it leaves as water, so it comes in as oxygen, leaves as water. This process here is known as cellular respiration, and this is an entire unit in grade 12 biology, right? So the grade 11 is all the organ tissue stuff, and the grade 12 is more the smaller cellular and molecular stuff, okay? So the cellular respiration, you don't need to know this. You just need to know the definition, but that's it. In terms of your knowledge, you should understand external and internal respiration. So that's the process. One more time, the oxygen comes in. You should breathe through your nose for a number of reasons. It goes into the trachea, it goes into your bronchi, it goes into your bronchial tubes, it goes into the alveoli. The air is rich in oxygen, so the oxygen diffuses across this. And there's certain major requirements of a respiratory system. For you to have a proper respiratory surface, there are 3 major ingredients that all respiratory surfaces must have. They include, 1, the surface must be moist. If it's dry, then the respiration will not proceed properly. So, 1. Must be moist. Right, so that's one of the reasons why you want to breathe through your nose. It keeps your respiratory system from drying out. 2, you need an extensive surface area. So your respiratory system, if you were to take your lungs and spread it out, it's supposed to be able to cover like 2 tennis courts worth of surface area. It's really extensive. So that's number 2. And number 3, the membrane must be thin. So these are 3 requirements for respiration to occur. If you don't have these 3 requirements, respiration will be incredibly difficult. So in the alveoli, there's moisture all through here. It's extensive, with the lungs being full of all these little tiny air sacs. And the membrane from the alveoli to the blood vessel is so thin that the oxygen can diffuse across and the carbon dioxide can diffuse across. In the blood vessel, we have special cells known as red blood cells. And these red blood cells have a special component known as hemoglobin that are able to attach to the oxygen and then carry that throughout the body. When you do one of the Learn 360 activities, you'll learn more about the role of hemoglobin and how it does what it needs to do. There are certain respiratory disorders that occur because the hemoglobin doesn't work properly, or the hemoglobin binds the wrong thing. So sickle cell anemia we've talked about, and that's where the blood cell takes on a very different shape. Carbon monoxide poisoning, where the hemoglobin will bind either oxygen or carbon monoxide, whichever's in higher concentration. You can't use carbon monoxide, so if you get anything but oxygen bonding, then that can lead to fatality, right? You hear every year that there's always a family or 2 that's left a car on in the garage, and the child or the parents have died due to carbon monoxide poisoning, or a faulty furnace, or running a barbecue inside your garage, or something like that. So that is the majority. Now you're going to look through the PowerPoint and you'll learn more about the diaphragm and its purpose, the intercostal muscles, external and internal, and their role, what they do. You'll learn about negative respiration. All those things you'll pick up from the PowerPoint. All right, so hopefully this is enough information to go along with the PowerPoint and the video links for you to understand the entire process. I'll shrink this so we can see the whole thing, see what's going on, and I will end it here.